Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another video and today's topic is, how could they have been wrong? One of the best questions that I am asked on my preterism videos is how the early church, how the church fathers could have possibly been wrong regarding the coming of Christ. And this is something that I have pondered as well. In fact, I even made a video about it. I might have even been last year, and I will share a link, or not a link, I'll share a thumbnail for it at the end of this video. It's called Hiding the Return of Christ. How? So in that, I shared some videos for how that possibly could have happened, that those who were around very close to the time that the destruction of Jerusalem actually happened seem to have, if we will, read these writings that have been translated from the church fathers, they do seem to indicate that at that point in time, they were still looking for some future resurrection. Well, I have been reading Like Father, Like Son, on Clouds of Glory by Don Preston, and he brought up a very good passage that to me is a great explanation for how this could possibly have happened. I'm going to read the whole passage. It's Luke 24, verses 13 to 35. That very day, two of them, and by two of them, it's referring to two of the apostles. And you can find this by just reading just a few verses earlier in Luke 24. But that very day, two of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. For context, just so that you know, this was very shortly after the crucifixion. Like, this was right after Mary Magdalene came and said that she had seen Jesus and that the tomb was empty. Okay. So now, starting at verse 15, it says, while they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, what is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk? And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days? And he said to them, what things? And they said to him, concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back, saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. And he said to them, and this is Jesus speaking, O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he were going farther, but they urged him strongly, saying, stay with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is now far spent. So he went in to stay with them. When he was at table with them, he took the bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened to us the scriptures? And they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together, saying, the Lord has risen indeed and has appeared to Simon. Then they told what had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. So in this account, we have two men who were followers of Jesus. You couldn't have gotten much closer to being in the time period, much closer than even the church fathers were. These were actual apostles. They were followers of Christ who had been in intimate settings with him and who knew him personally. And yet, what do we learn from this passage? we learn that these men, even though they had seen the miracles, they had listened to Jesus speak, and even though they considered him to be a great prophet of God, they said that they had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem them, specifically to redeem Israel. So even though they had believed while Jesus was with them and while they were walking around with him and listening to him, that he was the one, he was the coming Messiah, he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. Now, since he had been crucified, since he had died, they believed that he was not the one, and they were sad about it. So, to be quite honest, even though they certainly weren't the ones who called for him to be crucified, they were very similar to the Pharisees, in my opinion, here, because they were expecting him to be a king. They were not expecting him to be crucified and to suffer, even though the scriptures said that this would happen. And after they had said these things to Jesus, he himself told them that they were slow of heart when it came to believing the prophets, because the prophets themselves said that the Messiah was going to have to suffer these things. But since they saw Jesus suffer these things, and since they, in their eyes, he was still dead, they thought that he was not the Messiah. They stopped believing because they had seen him crucified. Even though they knew him, they were living amongst him in his time period, not 200 years later, not 100 years later, not even 50 years later. They were there with him. And yet we have these men who were with him and still didn't understand. They still did not understand what the prophecies truly said about what he was going to have to do. And they did not understand until Jesus himself opened their eyes. Before they even knew who he was, as he was still on the road with them, he had to go back and he had to go through all of the prophecies with them to explain to them what it was that was supposed to happen. And it wasn't until later that night when he was breaking bread with them that they realized that it was Jesus and their eyes were opened. So, my friends, if you ask me, how could people, 100, 200 years later, or even 50 years later, not understand that this judgment of Jerusalem was in fact the parousia of Christ? I'm going to say, I think it's very possible, because if you consider that Jesus' own followers who intimately knew him, who walked with him, who lived with him, who heard him speak, who saw him performing miracles, when things started going in a way that they were not expecting, they themselves, they stopped believing for a bit that he was the Messiah. They started going back to their own understanding. And even though these men, these were Jewish men, they had grown up with the Torah. They had grown up with all of these prophecies, and yet they did not even understand until Jesus went through everything with them and opened their eyes. That's how, unfortunately, that's how humans are. We have a very short memory, and sometimes when things are difficult for us to understand, we will resort to believing the easiest thing instead of the truest thing. That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one down below. And if you like my work and would like to become a channel member, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well, or you can just click on it right on my channel page. And I hope you have a great day.